but it's a mindset. So as researchers, we are researchers, yes, but we're actually product makers who happen to do research. Or if you're a data scientist on a product team, you're a product maker who happens to do the data science, and same for design. And I really strongly believe that if you bring that perspective and that mindset to your work every day, it's going to change how you show up, how you interact with your other teammates.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Sheri Panabaker, who is an accomplished UX leader with an impressive 23 years tenure at Microsoft, where she served as Senior Director of UX Research. During her time at Microsoft, Sheri played an instrumental role in shaping product and marketing strategies for a diverse range of consumer, enterprise, and employee experiences. Her extensive expertise in UX research and data analytics enabled her to drive a user-centered culture within Microsoft, significantly influencing the development of innovative experiences across Windows, Surface, and Microsoft digital programs. In her post-Microsoft career, Sheri is committed to mentoring and developing diverse talent while continuing to shape her insights at speaking events, with a focus on applying UX and design thinking to reimagine the fan experience in sports, particularly Formula One. In this episode, Sheri Panabaker had shared great insights on product maker's mindset. We had discussed on what does a term product maker mean and how does this mindset is different from product design and development approaches. We then spoke on, as a product maker, what strategies used to collaborate effectively with other team members such as engineers, marketers, and designers, and how to ensure that everyone is aligned around the same goals and priorities. Later that, we spoke about what role does storytelling play in translation of insights to design considerations, and how could researchers work with design and PM to get clarity. Then we spoke on different ways to measure the success of a product and different metrics to evaluate it. We then concluded the show by Sheri's advice to aspiring product makers on different tools and skill set that they must equip to be successful. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and on every Friday we release new episodes with different creative leaders from around the world to help you better understand different concepts related to design. So don't forget to tune in into Notes of Design every Friday. With that being said, happy designing everyone. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. In this episode, we have a very wonderful guest with us. Hi Sheri, welcome to Nodes of Design.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So Sheri, how was your day so far?
It's been good. It's only 9 a.m. So right now I've gotten kids up and ready for school. And now I am ready to do the podcast.
So Sheri, if you could give a brief about yourself to our audience out there.
Absolutely, yes. I'm Sheri Panabaker, and I am a UX leader who has worked at Microsoft for over 23 years. I actually started as an intern, but recently I left Microsoft, and now I am pursuing some of my personal career goals and passions outside of the world of tech.
That's wonderful, Sheri. So what was your journey into design and how did you start? And what are your tips to the beginners on how to start?
So my journey into design was not 100% calculated at the time that I entered into university. But quickly, when I was in school, I started to realize that this discipline of UX research existed. And I crafted very diligently my path into the discipline. I went to school in Canada at a university called the University of Waterloo. And at that school, they had an internship program. And so every 4 months you would go on work terms. And at the time, my boyfriend, who is now my husband, got an internship at Microsoft. And so I was doing a lot of research about the types of jobs that existed at Microsoft. And I came across a role that was called a usability engineer. And I read the job descriptions and thought, well, I can sort of do this already with the degree that I'm studying. But then when I met with people, in the industry, everyone, at least at that time, was very adamant that you needed some form of an advanced degree. So I carefully crafted having a master's degree after that so that I would be considered at a company like Microsoft. So I studied in my undergraduate a Bachelor of Science with a focus on ergonomics and human factors. And then in my master's, I studied systems design engineering with a focus on human systems and human computer interaction. And so that was all designed to hopefully be considered for tech companies. Along the way, between my undergrad and my graduate program, I made sure that in my fourth year, before I graduated my undergrad, that I was doing something meaningful that would contribute to my experience. And so I did a usability evaluation of a technology that was called Web TV. And it was a set-top box basically that allowed you to connect to the internet. And back in 1999, that was pretty darn cool. And so I was able to gain relevant experience in the field, but then also ended up getting an internship that summer at Web TV, and they were purchased by Microsoft. So I was able to really craft my whole path in a methodical way by getting the experience I needed to then be noticed, got hired at Web TV and worked there for 2 work terms, actually, in between my grad school time. And my grad school, I was also able to go back and do my master's thesis data collection. So I did a very applied project with Web TV and Microsoft. So I feel very fortunate to have been able to do all of that as part of a blend of work experience and completing my education. So once I got hired at Microsoft, I moved to California and I worked in a very large research team. There was 12, actually it was called usability engineering. I'm in the field long enough that the titles have changed, but with a bunch of usability engineers, there I was an individual contributor, learned so much working with all of these wonderful people. Interestingly, when we ran usability studies, we ran the studies in pairs and we learned so much from each other collaboratively working. It was the only place I ever got to work formally in pairs doing the craft of user research. And then after working in the interactive TV space for a couple of years as an individual contributor, I moved up to Microsoft in Redmond. I wanted to be part of the big mothership, so to speak, and worked for a similar type of product. It was called Windows Media Center. You could pause TV, you could, record music and transfer your CDs onto the device, and it used metadata to show album art. It was a very innovative and progressive user interface. And there is where I started to grow my leadership skills, moved from an IC to a lead and then a people manager, moved on from Windows Media Center to Live Labs, where I wanted to work as a design and research manager. And it was totally in an incubation space, so very different than the product experience that I had previously, but that was all by design. I was always very calculated in my career decisions. And so I was looking for design leadership experience in addition to the UX research leadership and also working kind of on the fuzzy front end. Then after that, I worked in hardware and I spent almost 9 years of my career in hardware at Microsoft, working first on webcams, mice, and keyboard design, which was really cool because I finally, after 10 years of my career, was able to pull in that ergonomics and human factors work that I had done in my undergraduate. And then Surface, all the product line of Surface was created. And so my team quickly evolved into working on all of the Surface hardware. So all the innovation on the thin keyboards, the creation of that new device, the 2-in-1 tablet. And then, we made other laptops. And so that was a really amazing experience, not only because it was fun to be part of an organization that was forming, but in hardware, I had the opportunity to really think end to end. And so all of the research that we did, it covered the whole gamut. We worked all the way from the beginning in terms of product definition, but then also working very closely with marketing in the identification of the brand, the messaging, the go-to-market strategy. We would do research on the messaging and positioning statements. We would also even do research on the packaging and what did the design of the packaging convey and was that aligned with the initial vision. And so that was formidable for me because not a lot of roles at Microsoft really enabled you to think fully end to end like a product owner. And I think that's probably where also it created some of the things that I really started to understand that were really important in terms of having impact in our field, which is about being a product maker. And so obviously I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about that today. And then in the final stages of my career, I left hardware and took an exciting opportunity where we were basically establishing an entire UX studio that focused on employee experience and internal experiences at Microsoft to digitally transform all aspects of one of the largest enterprises in the world. And when I joined, that research team had 4 researchers. And when I left, we had 40 researchers. And so just the challenge of growing a studio, setting a culture, and hiring at the same time, still being able to influence on all of the different areas that we were working in. It was such a gratifying experience for sure. But I look back at my career and I think it's so amazing to think about being able to stay at one company, but get experience across hardware, software, services, applications, internal experiences. It's such a storied event of your career. And yet at the same time, it was with one company. And so I really feel I was very privileged to do that, because also being able to juggle work and life, being able to stay at one company is actually, I think, a really great thing.
That's a very beautiful journey. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what are your tips for the beginners on starting their design journey?
Yeah, so I get asked this question a lot. The biggest thing that I would say to give advice for is the core skill set of our craft and our discipline is what's going to get your foot in the door. And it's what you will rely on in the early stages of your career, but it's not how you're going to continue to grow and evolve. And so in the beginning, you better be an expert at your craft. And so, in the UX research discipline, people who are entering into that field have masters and PhDs in research. They know research inside and out. I always joke managing my people, I just have a master's degree. So I would always joke and say, I'm like one of the least educated on the team. And I don't necessarily, when I'm leading teams and hiring, necessarily require that there's a PhD, but the people, at least at Microsoft and in the other tech companies, if you're targeting a big tech company like a Google, an Amazon, a Facebook, Apple, the caliber of people that are entering in there, they have a depth in their craft and their discipline, and they know the methodologies and toolkit for UX research inside and out. They know the pros and cons of each methodology, and they are able to apply those to any problem. And so I feel like that's a big piece of it. And then you also need to have really strong skills just that are soft skills. And so that will become more important as you move out of, say, the first 1 or 2 years in your career, because people are going to recognize that you're new in your career. And so it's really about getting your foot in the door, getting the experience, applying those skill sets to real problems and demonstrating that you can have impact inside of a company. But I would say definitely knowing your craft is super important.
Thank you so much, Sheri, for sharing those wonderful insights with us. Now, let's get our episode started with product maker's mindset. So what does the term product maker mean to you, and how does this mindset differ from the other product design and development approaches?
So yeah, if anyone ever has worked with me on the UX side of the world, they would know that I always talk about a product maker. And so how I think about this is I wouldn't say that I look at it as it's a different approach to product development, but it's a mindset. So as researchers, we are researchers, yes, but we're actually product makers who happen to do research. Or if you're a data scientist on a product team, you're a product maker who happens to do the data science, and same for design, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I talk about it with people. And I really strongly believe that if you bring that perspective and that mindset to your work every day, it's going to change how you show up, how you interact with your other teammates. And so I'll give you an example. In the discipline of UX research, I have seen a lot in my career that researchers think that one of their sole roles is to sort of be a critic and to identify everything that is wrong, that needs to be changed. Yes, we do that as part of our UX research and really understanding what users need. However, it can often turn into being an armchair critic, and you are sort of giving these critiques to things, but then you're positioning it almost like you're outside of the circle of where the work is happening. And I don't believe that if you're working with a team and collaborating, that if you approach things in that way, that you're going to be listened to. If you're wearing a product maker mindset, you're going to approach how you uncover those insights differently. You're probably going to have stronger alignment with your squad or your feature crew. You're going to bring them into the fold on what are the questions we should be answering. They're going to be part of the process when you're doing the research. And then when you're giving the delivery of your insights and making recommendations on where the product needs to evolve or if you're in the vision and strategy phase, hopefully by doing all of these things where you're being collaborative and have that product maker mindset, number one, they're going to listen to you more because they see that you're on the same team versus coming across like you're on the outside or a different team. Nobody wants to work with someone who approaches their work in that way. And so that's why I think the product maker mindset is so important. And it's some of the things I've also seen where design and research at Microsoft have not necessarily had the respect that they had hoped in a product team. And so I believe that's been some of the challenges that our disciplines have had in the past.
Thanks, Sheri. So as a product maker, what strategies do you use to collaborate effectively with other team members, such as engineers, marketers, and also designers? And how do you ensure everyone is aligned around the same goals and priorities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as a UX professional, whether you're primarily focused on UX research or whether it's more on the design side, which, by the way, as a side note, I will clarify, at Microsoft in particular, the design profession is divided up into folks who do UX research, those who do design, and then there's a lot of definitions within design, whether you're a visual designer, interaction designer, animation, just to name a few. And then the third one is content. So the content creators and writers are also part of the discipline. And so at Microsoft, when I would lead teams, the big thing is to get in front and make sure that we're contributing first and foremost to the vision and strategy. So depending on your organization, they may have a formal vision document that they're writing that sets the tone for the next big release. Getting involved in that and working with the different product managers who are driving that process, that's super critical. So making sure that the research that you're doing is aligned and has awareness, so that when you're doing the work, it's feeding the vision and strategy document. Once you move to having generated insights that are in the planning phase, what often happens is researchers are not properly translating those insights into something that's actionable for the team. And so spending a lot of time with design and the product maker or the product managers to create goals and understanding of what the users are needing, that's super important as well, because a lot of companies now are using OKRs, objectives, and key results to define products. And so you need to be able, as a researcher who wants to be strategic, you need to be able to translate your insights into objectives and key results and speak the same language as your engineering team. So if you're not using objectives and key results in your organization, you can still create goals. I call them UX goals in that case, if they're not, if your team is not using objectives and key results. Getting alignment on what the user experience goals are for the product, that's a great way to have the discipline of design and research be influential in the product making. The other thing that I'll mention that is less discipline specific, but that I think is super important for collaboration is how you build trust with your stakeholders. I actually think that that's more important than any of the work that we do in our craft. Nothing in business can happen without trust and a focus on relationships. And so, building trust with the key stakeholders. One of the things I always recommend to people in my mentoring sessions is, go and identify who the people are that you're going to be working with or that you need to be working with, and understand what's the frequency by which you're meeting with them. Do you have a connection with them already? Are you going to need a connection with them? And then you consciously put an impact and influence strategy in place so that you can go and work with these people so that there's a relationship there, so that when you're showing up and trying to influence and have, sometimes you will have conflict or disagreements, you've invested in that trust and the connection in that relationship so that you are able to be influential. Because one of the big questions I always get asked by people is, how do I have more influence? How do I get people to listen to me? And it's not about standing on our pulpit of, UX amazingness, design amazingness, research amazingness. It's really about making that connection with people so that they will listen. The other thing that I would say is, in terms of having impact and being collaborative, is that you want to speak in a way that people will listen to you. And so not being critical, coming across as a team player, be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work, whether it's related to design or research or not. That's going to go a long way, again, in that product maker mindset and being collaborative with your teammates. Because if you look at the other disciplines, often they're doing things that aren't squarely defined within their discipline, but to build a product, the work just has to get done.
So Sheri, what role does storytelling play in product development process, and how do you talk about insights and translation of those insights to design considerations or working with designs and PM to get clarity on it? And what is the possible outcome of this?
Yeah, so the one thing that I think is really important in the research discipline is that when you are done collecting all of your data, that you spend the right amount of time actually doing interpretation. And often what I see where the research discipline falls short is that researchers think that collecting the data and then just sharing the data back is what their role is. And as a result, the storytelling piece totally falls flat because you're basically handing off stuff. Not everyone maybe has been on that journey. And so they don't really understand what the users were saying or what their needs are. And so researchers need to spend a lot of time interpreting the data and delivering an insight versus reporting on the data. And so one of the things that I talk a lot about with the researchers when we're going through the communication is, if you look at a piece of data that you think is actually probably more around an insight and you ask the question why, like, why is the person having that problem, or why are they having that need? And you can still provide further explanation, then you probably haven't actually interpreted the data strongly enough to get to insight. And so once you can get to insight, then you can create a whole story around all your different insights so that it really creates clarity around what the situation or the context is for the topic that you're studying. And then it also, when you're presenting that, hopefully will generate energy and ideas with your stakeholders about how to solve and address those needs and problems and pain points.
Thanks, Sheri. So how to measure the success of your products, and what metrics do you use to evaluate a product success?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is really important, building on what I said earlier about going and doing the right generative research and really understanding the needs and building either the UX goals, translating those into the OKRs, if that's the framework that your engineering team is using, is to really think holistically and end to end about the metrics. So for example, often you'll see people run usability studies that are evaluating prototypes throughout the product development process, but they don't really keep some of the questions consistent. So then you can't track over time the progress that you're making against the goals. And so what I like to do is for every project, once you've been able to understand deeply up front, translate those into the user experience goals and outcomes that you know that experience needs to achieve. So I'll give you a really concrete example. We had an aspiration in the Surface product group to build a world-class trackpad that would compete at the same level as the Apple trackpads on their devices. And Mac at the time was known to have the best trackpad on the laptops, in whether it's a PC or a Mac. And so we went and we studied what the trackpad experience was like in Apple, and were able to translate all of those insights and the needs that humans have to define 3 very clear UX goals. Number 1, your trackpad needed to provide perfect speed and control when you were interacting with it and using it. It had to never be disruptive, because you had other trackpads, when you're typing, your thumbs and your fingers would brush against it, and then terrible stuff would happen, like hitting send too prematurely on an email. And then the third one was you had to have great hardware interaction. And that covered a lot of things, from the physical attributes, the feeling of the click, the feeling of the paint, the texture, the coefficient of friction, all of those things. And so we defined what those 3 goals were. But then we could establish throughout all of the evaluative user studies, are we meeting the expectations of those UX goals? And so, within those UX goals, we then defined how are we explicitly going to measure each of those. And there was probably 4 to 5 things within each of that. And so we would have that be part of the studies that we were doing. And then we could also, when we were doing studies following up, post-release, we could have some of the same questions at the end of a site visit, and we could ask questions so that we could look more holistically at that. In the world of employee experience, which was the last team that I was on, we took an even more robust approach to some of the measurement. The one example that comes to mind is when we were working in the sales space and reimagining the tools that our sellers at Microsoft use. I mean, the workforce who sells product at Microsoft is massive, and we were redesigning and digitally transforming all of the tools that they use. We came up with high-level general UX goals in the sales space. What were sellers trying to achieve? We had a set of consistent questions that we put in each study, regardless of what the topic was, because at the end of the day, every sub-feature, sub-piece of experience needed to ultimately attribute or contribute to these high-end goals that we established at the beginning that all sellers would want to have. And then we also were able to work with the sales organization when they were creating their large quantitative survey to get feedback from the sellers on all of the tools. And we were able to incorporate those questions quantitatively as well. So we were able to get a definition of kind of what success looked like. We defined what success was and was able to collect data throughout the messy product development process where we're iterating, but it enabled us to track our progress. And then we were able to measure that in the quantitative survey, where at the time, I think like over 50% of the sellers would take the survey. And so we had very robust data. But because we kept the measurement systematic and consistent, we were able to have, I think, a really great way to measure and understand. And then the last thing that I would add to that whole mix is, as researchers, how are you partnering, if it's a separate discipline, how are you partnering with data science to look at all of the telemetry data that is also being collected on that product and experience? And so making sure that you're thinking about measurement before you ship the product, but helping to define with the data engineers what questions you need to answer related to usage so that you can look at that telemetry data once the product is shipped. And then depending on, the extensiveness of your product, there's often an opportunity to collaborate with the people who are collecting customer sentiment. Sometimes they do that through NPS or some type of a system prompt or a survey to get feedback. And so making making sure that you're working with those people as well, or in some cases, you are the team that is also collecting that data. And so making sure that you have a robust way that you're looking at all of those data sources so that you can bring together one source of truth on what the customer feedback is.
That's wonderful, Sheri. Thank you for sharing those in a great detail. So let's talk about what advice do you have for aspiring UX researchers, and what skills and mindset do you think are most important for success in this field?
So at the beginning, I talked about core skills and having a really strong skill set. You don't have to do an advanced degree necessarily to get the research depth, but you better for sure know your stuff. But I think the difference between a good versus a great researcher or a good versus a great UX designer is the emotional intelligence and the way in which you work with people every day. I have seen amazing, brilliant designers and researchers who have zero impact in a large company. Probably if they were in a small company, it would be a similar situation because they don't know how to get along with others. They don't know how to provide, or say things that might be difficult to say in a diplomatic way. And they speak in a way that it pushes people away versus wanting to draw them in. They don't, I talked about trust. They don't spend time building the relationships. They also don't spend time maybe understanding the context by which other people are having to make decisions. And so researchers and designers are often like, well, why aren't you listening to me? And you should just do what I'm saying because I know the best. I know what the users need. And that's absolutely true. But if you step back for a minute and you put your product maker hat on, usually there's business decisions and constraints that need to be taken into account. There's technology decisions and constraints, and there's experience decisions and constraints. And so the more quickly that you can evolve your understanding to be more than just experience and also understand the B and the T, the business and the technology, that will make you a more holistic contributor. But also that's really what it takes to build a product, because sometimes you have to make trade-offs between what the business needs and what the user needs. And now hopefully, usually what is good for the user will be good for the business, but you have to understand there might be something in timing or cost that you do have to make some trade-off, especially in something like a hardware product. You always were having to make trade-offs between what the user would maybe need and want versus the cost of it physically, because hardware is expensive to produce and you need to be able to make money on what you're building.
Thank you so much, Sheri, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. Could you please share with us how does your new role look like and any interesting stories?
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I left Microsoft last April after an amazing career. I absolutely loved it. However, my children are at the ages where my daughter's going to college next year and my son only has a couple more years left. And I just felt like I wanted to step back and give myself the time to spend with my children. And so for the first 6 months, I did nothing related to my profession. I was literally just hanging out with the kids and doing what I wanted to do, gardening, things that I've never had time to do before because, working at Microsoft, having 2 parents working at Microsoft, we were just super busy. But now I would say a typical day looks like where I'm spending time actively networking. So I have a couple goals. I'm a big believer in having a purpose and having goals. And so when I left Microsoft and had that 6 months of time to think, I really had time to clarify, what am I going to do next? What is my purpose? What do I want to do? And so I want to give back to others. So I want to give back just generally in community initiatives that I'm passionate about, that I care about. So I'm investing in sharing my leadership experience back home in Canada in the small town that I'm from. So I'm helping with some of their entrepreneurial initiatives that they have, helping women entrepreneurs in the area. So I'm doing that. I also have decided that I want to continue to help the UX discipline. And so I've started office hours. On my LinkedIn profile, you can find in my latest work experience, there's a link to the office hours. I offer time to just book time with me and we can talk about any questions or advice you're seeking. And what's interesting out of doing that, I've had a few people ask if I would formally advise them in their career. And so I've taken on some paid clients, which was not really what I expected to do, but I decided to jump in and do that. And so that's been very rewarding. And so I spend time probably about 5 hours a week doing that. So it's not always a typical day. And then the other thing that I'm spending a lot of time on is I do have an interest in bridging the discipline of UX into the field of Formula One. And that is my personal passion right now. I love Formula One. I always have as a young girl watching it with my father. And so I am spending an immense amount of time on LinkedIn every single day since about January. So I gave myself time since leaving Microsoft where I am building out my connections in that industry. I had none whatsoever. And I'm slowly building out those connections. The thing that is most exciting right now, that's probably my biggest success, which is still a small success, but I think it's still pretty cool, is I approached one of the Formula One race teams and proposed to them that I come and do an outside-in guest speaker event where I talk about management and leadership and my experience at Microsoft and what they taught us and what that looks like, and share it with one of the Formula One teams. And so I'm flying over to England in April, and I will be delivering that to one of the teams. And then hopefully maybe that will turn into some more talks. Another talk that we had discussed was women working in, more male-dominated industries like Formula One, and what was my experience like at Microsoft. So I'm hoping that will plant a seed and expand into some other opportunities in Formula One.
That's a really wonderful period, Sheri, and looking forward to your wonderful contributions to the community. We'll conclude the show by you recommending 3 favorite books of yours and also people who inspire you the most in this space.
So books, this was fun when you sent the questions over, because immediately the books that came to mind have nothing to do with the discipline of UX, design, research. I definitely have books that I think are great in that department, but that's not what I would reach out to and say, I'm going to buy this book for someone else. So the first book, my husband bought this for me. At the time, he was my boyfriend. He gave it to me at Christmas in 1996. It's like inscribed into the book. And it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And it's, there's Dale Carnegie training classes that people can take, but I just had the book, and I had the book from the beginning of my career. It was so monumentally influential in my career. A couple of the principles that they go through in the book really kind of stuck with me and guided me. So that one of them is don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And that doesn't mean to not speak up. Like if you work with me, anyone would say, Sheri definitely speaks up. She knows how to assert herself, how to do it in a way that was constructive and that would move the conversation forward and that was very solution oriented. And so that book, that's one example within the book that really from the very beginning kind of influenced how I show up and interact with people. But the book there's like 100 other amazing examples inside of the book. So that's number one. The second book is a book called The 360-Degree Leader. And and then the subtitle is Developing Your Influence from Anywhere in the Organization. And so I got this book probably about 5 years into my Microsoft career. And it was right around the time that I started managing people. And if any of the people that know me well would, they would say that, I'm definitely like kind of a studious person, and I'm always learning and reading on things. And so I really am very passionate about learning about what leadership is and how to develop leadership characteristics. And so, again, this book has amazing insights in it. But the thing that really influenced me the most is it's called the 360-degree leader. And that's for a reason, because they define leadership by thinking about managing up, managing out and sideways, and managing down, and identifying and thinking about who are those people above you that you need to be influencing, who are your peers that are horizontal that you need to be influencing, and then below you as well. And those are the people that you're managing. And, if you think about some of the things that I talked about earlier related to building trust, how do you build trust with people above you, the people who are your peers, and the people below you? Because you don't know necessarily when you're going to need these people, help you influence something or to, some type of idea that you have or just getting work done. And so by thinking about the 360-degree aspect of influencing and providing leadership, I think it really changes the way that you approach your work. The other quick point that I'll make in this book that I think is really important, and I think it's important for people early on in their career to think about, is this whole myth of, well, I can't lead if I'm not at the top. I need the title. I need to be promoted to the next level. And I just don't agree with that. I think that number one, you need to demonstrate that you can lead before you're given a position of authority. And true leaders, people want to follow you regardless of what your title is. And so I think it's really important for people early in their career to realize that the title is not going to get you the respect. It'll give you a little bit of respect, sure. People will be a little nicer to you if you end up becoming a manager. But really, at the end of the day, you have to earn their respect. You have to give them a reason to want to follow you. And so I think in this book, especially just by having a book kind of say that, like it got me really thinking about it, because when you're 5 years into your career, you're pretty naive about what leadership is. So that was the second book. And then the third book for me is a book that I've engaged with. And partially it's because of this talk that I'm giving about leadership and management with the Formula One team, because I wanted to accurately retell the story of how Microsoft came about creating their leadership principles and their management principles. And so I've gone back and read the book that Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, wrote right when he took over Microsoft. And it's called Hit Refresh. And it talks all about the transformation of the culture and the transformation of how they want employees to think, which is, let's be learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. So the whole growth mindset and having empathy in the work that we do, whether it be for our customers, colleagues, and being customer obsessed. But then, he talks about leadership principles and the management principles. And if you've worked with me, you'll know that Sheri just does not shut up about the leadership principles, which at Microsoft, they're create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success. And I believe that those three principles, regardless of your role, regardless of your level, are the most amazing principles for you to apply to be an effective leader. And so those are some of the books for me that are really influential. And then you asked about the person. I always have people that I look to for inspiration in my career. And I find that it changes. It changes depending on what I'm doing or what I'm trying to achieve. But there's a common theme, which is I typically look for people outside of my discipline, outside of my craft, even outside of the world of, say, tech, where I was working. And so recently, probably the last 4 years, I have read every piece of news, watched every video that exists. There's a 7-time world champion in Formula One. His name is Lewis Hamilton. He is the first Black driver in Formula One. And while he's an amazing driver, which I absolutely love studying people who are at the top of their game and their craft, and what do they do? How are they excellent? What I think is amazing with Lewis is that he speaks his mind and he doesn't follow the pack. He always does things differently. He didn't always, actually. Like when he first joined Formula One, it was very difficult for him to feel like he could be himself. But over time, he gained more confidence, and he really talks about that. And now he shows up to the paddock, and it's like a fashion runway walk in, and he's just himself. He's such an advocate for diversity and inclusion and equality. I think that he also just, treats people with kindness and respect. He's so articulate. He's so purposeful. The discipline that he puts in every single day is just amazing. And then the other thing that's really resonated with me is that he found out pretty late in his high school life that he is dyslexic and has ADHD. And I think that that is a very interesting thing because he's amazing. And for him to overcome some of these challenges despite that and being comfortable and confident talking about it out loud is something that I look up to. And then he's also putting his money where his mouth is, in the sense that he's started Mission 44, which is his own charity about helping underrepresented minorities, women, people of color to get more into motorsport. He's providing scholarships for people to get into motorsport. He's understood what are some of the barriers to people of color in the United Kingdom and working to influence the school system. And then he's also been extremely influential with Mercedes and the leadership at Mercedes. They have Ignite 25, which is they have some goals around the percentage of people in the team, so that it's more diverse and reflective of a society. He lobbied to change the color of the Formula One car to black in honor of Black Lives Matter. And so I just think he is amazing.
That's wonderful, Sheri. Thank you so much for sharing these wonderful book recommendations. We are looking forward to host you again for our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being able to share some of the experience and wisdom that I've gained in my career.